I never told my son about my monthly $30,000 salary. He always saw me living simply. He invited me to dinner with his wife's parents. I wanted to see how they treat a poor person by pretending to be a ruined and naive mother. But as soon as I walked through the door, everything changed, and what happened devastated my daughter-in-law and her family in a way they have never imagined. Well, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start at the beginning. My name is Marina Bennett, and I've spent 30 years perfecting the art of invisible wealth. People see what they expect to see. A tired woman in discount clothing living paycheck to paycheck. They never look close enough to notice the truth hiding in plain sight. It was a Tuesday when my phone rang. I was sitting at my $8 thrift store desk, reviewing investment reports that showed $2.3 million in liquid assets. The irony always made me smile, making decisions worth millions on furniture that belonged in a college dorm. My modest apartment had become both my sanctuary and my greatest disguise. "Mom?" Tobias's voice came through nervous and tight. "Do you have a minute?" I closed the folder immediately. The quarterly earnings from my tech stocks could wait. My son never could, not since the day I became his only parent. "Always, sweetheart," I said, keeping my voice warm and unhurried. There was a pause on his end, the kind that meant he was gathering courage. I heard him take a breath, and I already knew this conversation would cost him something. It always did when he had to reconcile the mother he loved with the poverty he thought defined me. "Celeste's parents want to meet you," he said quickly, words tumbling out. "Dinner next Saturday. At the Carlisle. It's important to me, Mom." The apology was already there, woven between every syllable. My beautiful boy, embarrassed of the woman who raised him. Not because he was cruel, because he believed the lie I'd spent decades constructing. The Carlisle. I knew it well. White tablecloths, French sommelier, entrees that cost more than most monthly car payments. I'd dined there at least 20 times over the years, closing deals and celebrating promotions. Once, I'd been seated 3 tables away from the mayor. But Tobias didn't know any of that. "That sounds lovely," I replied. Too quickly, too easily. I didn't ask about dress codes or whether I could afford to split the bill. I didn't express the nervousness he expected. Later, I would realize that was my first mistake. He should have noticed my confidence, but sons rarely see their mothers clearly, do they? "It's just dinner," he continued, voice tight with anxiety. "Nothing too fancy. I mean, it's nice. But don't worry about, he couldn't even say it. Don't worry about looking poor. Don't worry about embarrassing us. Don't worry that you're not enough. I'm looking forward to meeting them properly," I said gently, and meant it. Just not in the way he thought. After we hung up, I sat in the silence of my carefully curated poverty. Beige couch from a yard sale, actually a mid-century modern piece worth thousands that I'd rescued. Water-stained coffee table that was really distressed teak. Every item in this room told a story, and every story was a calculated lie. I opened my laptop and typed 2 words, Dominic Ashford. His face filled my screen. Silver-haired, sharp-suited, the smile of a man who'd never been told no. His real estate empire stretched across 3 states, shopping centers, luxury condos, commercial properties. Net worth estimated at $47 million. Self-made man, the articles proclaimed. American dream personified. I kept scrolling, digging deeper into interviews and podcasts. I wanted to know the man my son had chosen as a father-in-law. I wanted to understand who would judge me at that dinner table. 20 minutes later, I found what I was looking for, a business podcast from 18 months ago, Dominic Ashford on success, ambition, and the mythology of merit. "People who stay poor by choice," his recorded voice declared, dripping with contempt, "lack discipline. They lack vision. They make excuses instead of making money. Poverty is a mindset before it's a bank balance." The host had laughed appreciatively. I didn't. I just noted the timestamp and saved the file. Evidence, should I ever need it. I walked to my bedroom closet and opened both doors wide. The left side held my public life, Goodwill cardigans, faded denim, clearance rack polyester blouses. The uniform of struggle, worn smooth by repetition. The right side, hidden behind a black garment bag, held the truth. Chanel suits, Armani blazers, Italian leather that cost more than some people's monthly rent. My fingers found a black Chanel jacket, still wrapped in tissue paper. I'd worn it to a Fortune 500 board meeting 3 years ago, the night I'd advised on a merger worth $200 million. The CEO had personally thanked me afterward, called me brilliant, asked for my card. Tobias thought I spent that week filing paperwork at a credit union branch. I let the garment bag fall closed and reached for something else instead. My mother's old wool coat, truly old, truly cheap, the only authentic piece of poverty I still owned. She'd worn it through 2 decades of factory shifts. I'd worn it through my first corporate job, too proud to replace it until the sleeves literally frayed. I'd kept it all these years for reasons I couldn't quite name. Now I knew why. It would be my costume, my armor, my weapon. The memory came then, sharp as broken glass, my husband's funeral. Tobias was 7, drowning in a borrowed suit 3 sizes too large. He'd held my hand so tight my fingers went numb. After everyone left, I'd sat him down in our empty apartment and made him a promise. You'll never want for anything. You'll never know what it's like to go without. I'd kept that promise. But I'd kept it quietly, invisibly, in ways he'd never understand. I built wealth while wearing poverty's mask. I invested his college fund while driving a 15-year-old Honda. I paid cash for his books while clipping coupons for show. He learned to value hard work because he believed we had nothing. That was the gift I'd given him, the lie that taught the truth. But now that lie was about to become a weapon. I picked up my phone and scrolled to a name I hadn't called in months. Luther Grimes, financial advisor. Luther, I said when he answered, I need you on standby Saturday night. Dinner at the Carlyle around 8:30. Bring the full portfolio documentation, property deeds, investment statements, everything. I'll text you when it's time. There was a pause. Luther had been managing my wealth for 15 years. He'd never questioned my choices, no matter how strange. Are you sure about this, Marina? He asked quietly. Once you open that door, you can't close it again. I know, I said. But they wanted to meet the poor mother, so I'm going to give them exactly what they expect. I let that hang in the air for a moment before adding the rest, and then I'm going to show them what expectations cost. After I hung up, I stood at my window, looking out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, Dominic and Patricia Ashford were living their wealthy lives, completely unaware of what was coming. They thought they knew who I was. They thought they knew what Saturday's dinner would be. They thought they'd already written the story. Poor mother-in-law, graciously accepted into their superior world, grateful for their charity. They'd written it wrong. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out a file I'd started 6 months ago, when Tobias first told me he was serious about Celeste. Inside, newspaper clippings about Dominic's business, public records of his properties, court documents from a lawsuit 3 years ago, and buried in the back one document that would matter more than all the others combined. Proof that his self-made empire started with a $2 million inheritance from his uncle's estate. The self-made man was a myth, just like my poverty was a myth. The difference was, I knew the truth about both of us. On Saturday night, I'd make sure everyone else did too. But first, I had to play my part perfectly. First, I had to walk through that restaurant door and become the woman they expected. Meek, grateful, overwhelmed, poor. They wanted a performance. I'd give them the performance of a lifetime. And when the curtain finally fell, when the mask finally came off, we'd all see who'd been performing the longest. That's the thing about lies, isn't it? The best ones are the ones we tell ourselves. And the Ashfords had been lying to themselves for so long, they'd forgotten what the truth looked like. Saturday couldn't come fast enough. Saturday morning arrived like a held breath. I woke at dawn, though I'd barely slept, and stood in front of my closet for a full 10 minutes before touching anything. This wasn't about choosing clothes. It was about choosing a weapon, and the most dangerous weapon I owned was the appearance of having nothing at all. I pulled out jeans I'd bought at a thrift store 15 years ago. Actually, vintage Levi's worth $300 to the right collector, but nobody would know that. They were faded, scuffed at the knees, the kind of denim that screamed hand-me-down rather than vintage find. I paired them with a floral blouse I'd grabbed from a clearance rack at a drugstore, the kind with loose threads and a slightly crooked collar. Walmart shoes with worn heels completed the ensemble. I looked exactly like what Tobias believed I was, a woman who shopped sales and made do. The jewelry came next, or rather, the removal of it. My Cartier watch, a gift to myself after my first six-figure bonus, went into the drawer. In its place, a $12 Timex I'd bought at a gas station specifically for tonight. I removed the small pearl earrings, the delicate gold chain, stripped myself of every subtle marker of wealth until I was bare, unremarkable, forgettable. I stood in front of the full-length mirror and studied the woman looking back. She was tired, humble, worn down by years of barely getting by. Her clothes hung slightly wrong, her shoes were practical rather than stylish, her whole appearance whispered struggling. It was perfect. It was also a lie so elaborate, so carefully constructed, that even I almost believed it for a moment. My phone buzzed. Tobias, on my way. Be there in 20. I read the message 3 times, my chest tight with something I didn't want to name. Guilt, maybe. Or love. Or the terrible intersection of both. I was about to use my son as a prop in a performance he didn't know he was part of. That made me either the most protective mother alive or the most manipulative. I wasn't sure which. When Tobias arrived, I watched his face fall the moment I opened the door. He tried to hide it. My beautiful, kind boy always tried to hide his disappointment, but I saw it anyway. The way his eyes traveled from my worn shoes to my cheap blouse to my bare wrist where a watch should be. "Mom," he said carefully, "it's a nice place. Do you want to borrow something? Maybe a jacket or—" "I'm fine, sweetheart," I interrupted gently, pulling on my mother's old wool coat, the one authentic piece of my costume. It smelled faintly of mothballs and memories. Tobias's face did something complicated. Love and pity and embarrassment all tangled together. He nodded and didn't argue, which somehow made it worse. In the car, he coached me like I was a child heading to her first formal event. "There'll be a lot of forks, but just work from the outside in. Don't worry about ordering. Get whatever you want, but maybe not the most expensive thing. Dominic's paying, but he's weird about money, and he likes to talk about golf, so if he brings it up, just nod and smile." Each word was a tiny knife, not because he meant to wound, but because he thought he was helping. My son, trying to teach me etiquette in a restaurant I'd dined at more times than he'd been on dates. I watched him from the passenger seat, his hands tight on the steering wheel, his jaw clenched with anxiety. He was tying himself in knots, trying to protect my dignity while simultaneously apologizing for my existence. The contradiction didn't seem to register with him. I almost broke then, almost reached over and told him everything. About the money, the investments, the lie I'd built and maintained for 30 years. But I swallowed the truth and kept my face neutral. I needed to see this through. For him, for us, for the truth about the family he'd married into. We pulled up to the Carlisle, and valets appeared like magic, their crisp uniforms a stark contrast to my threadbare coat. The marble columns flanking the entrance gleamed in the evening light. A doorman with silver buttons and white gloves held the door, and I saw his eyes flick over my outfit with barely concealed disdain. He smiled at Tobias. Warm, professional. He glanced at me and the smile thinned to nothing. Just like that, I became invisible. Less than. Unworthy of the same courtesy. I catalogued his expression for later. Evidence. As we walked toward the entrance, I stopped and touched Tobias's arm. "Sweetheart," I said softly, "no matter what happens tonight, remember I love you." He looked at me with such tenderness, such concern, thinking I was nervous about meeting Celeste's parents, thinking I was afraid of embarrassing him. He squeezed my hand and said, "You could never embarrass me, Mom. You're perfect." I smiled and didn't correct him. He thought I was scared. I was apologizing in advance for what I was about to do, for what I was about to make him witness, for the person he was about to discover I'd always been. They were already seated when we entered. Claimed the best table in the house, naturally, the one by the window with a view of the city lights. Dominic Ashford sat at the head like a king holding court, his tailored suit probably worth more than most people's monthly mortgage. Patricia was beside him, dripping in subtle wealth, the kind of jewelry that doesn't scream but whispers expensively. And Celeste, my son's wife, sat polished and perfect, her smile bright and brittle as glass. I watched their faces as Tobias led me across the restaurant, and it was like watching a stage play of disgust performed in 3 acts. Dominic's smirk appeared first, quick, reflexive, the expression of a man confronting something distasteful. Patricia's face did something more complex, her eyebrows lifted in what might have been surprise or horror, her mouth tightening at the corners. Celeste just smiled harder, the brightness cranking up to compensate for her parents' poorly concealed revulsion. All this before I'd even reached the table. The handshake told me everything I needed to know. Dominic's grip was limp, perfunctory, the kind of handshake you give someone whose name you won't bother remembering. He dropped my hand almost immediately, as if sustained contact might be contagious. Patricia offered 2 fingers, literally 2 fingers, extended like she was greeting contaminated royalty. Her hand was cold and dry, and she withdrew it so fast I barely made contact. This was already going better than I'd hoped. They were showing me exactly who they were within seconds. "Marina!" Patricia said, her voice honey-sweet and venomous. "How wonderful to finally meet you. Tobias has told us so much. And you came straight from work?" Her eyes traveled over my outfit with surgical precision. I wasn't at work. It was Saturday evening. She knew that. The comment was purely to establish that I looked like someone who just finished a shift, someone who didn't know better, someone beneath her. "I hope I'm not underdressed," I said meekly, clutching my coat tighter around myself. "I don't get out to places like this very often." I let my voice go small, uncertain, overwhelmed. Dominic's smirk widened. "Clearly," he said, and Patricia laughed, a delicate tinkling sound that somehow managed to be crueler than an insult. Just one word. Clearly. As if my unworthiness was so obvious it didn't require elaboration. Celeste jumped in, her voice too bright, trying to paper over the cruelty with forced enthusiasm. "Mom, you look fine! Really? Doesn't she look fine, honey?" She looked desperately at Tobias, who was already sweating through his shirt, but her tone betrayed her. Fine meant acceptable. Fine meant you'll do. Fine meant please don't embarrass us more than you already have. I smiled at her gratefully, playing the role of the relieved mother-in-law. Inside, I marked her as complicit. Tobias was falling apart beside me, his anxiety a living thing in the air between us. He over-explained everything, where I worked, how hard I worked, how I'd raised him alone, how proud he was of me. He laughed too loud at Dominic's golf jokes I didn't understand because I wasn't meant to. He kept touching my shoulder like I needed reassurance, like I was the fragile one. All while the Ashfords watched with thinly veiled amusement, my son performing his love for me like an apology. It was the cruelest thing I'd witnessed so far. The menus arrived in leather binders, heavy and pretentious. I made a show of opening mine slowly, eyes widening at the prices. $45 for a salad, $78 for salmon, $120 for the Wagyu beef. Patricia watched me with predatory interest. "Order whatever you like, dear," she said magnanimously. "Dominic's treating tonight. Don't worry about the cost." Translation so clear it might as well have been subtitled, "We're buying you. Your gratitude is expected. Your place in the hierarchy is established." I ordered a side salad and water. Just that. Nothing else. The waiter looked confused, glanced at Dominic for confirmation. "Are you sure you don't want an entree, ma'am?" I shook my head, voice apologetic. "The salad is plenty. I'm not very hungry." Dominic actually laughed out loud. "Careful with money, I see. That's smart. Waste not, want not, right?" He said it like he was praising a child for basic arithmetic. Patricia nodded approvingly. Celeste studied her menu like it held the secrets of the universe. Under the table, my hands were steady as stone. I'd positioned them carefully on my lap, fingers laced together, completely calm. Above the table, I let myself tremble slightly. A small shake in my shoulders, a nervous fidget with my napkin. The coat stayed on because I claimed to be cold, but really it was armor, a barrier, a reminder of who I actually was beneath this performance. And while I played the frightened sparrow, I was cataloging everything. Patricia's Hermes Birkin bag, Spring 2023 collection, roughly $40,000. Dominic's Patek Philippe watch, at least $80,000, maybe more. The wine he'd ordered without consulting anyone. A Bordeaux I recognized from a Christie's auction, $400 a bottle. I priced their entire evening in my head while pretending not to understand the menu. They thought I couldn't read the room. I was reading them. "So, Marina," he said, voice dripping with false curiosity, "what is it you do?" It was a loaded question, a dagger wrapped in courtesy. He already knew I was nobody, he just wanted to hear me admit it. "I work in finance," I said quietly, eyes down. Nothing exciting, really. I could feel his interest sharpen like a predator catching a scent. "Finance?" he repeated, leaning forward slightly. "Like asset management? Investment banking?" He was giving me an out, a chance to claim something respectable. I shook my head meekly. More like a bank teller, processing transactions, that sort of thing. The lie tasted bitter, but I watched it land exactly as intended. Dominic's face shifted from curiosity to dismissal in half a second. Patricia jumped in immediately, her voice saccharine and poisonous. "Oh, how wonderful that you still work at your age. So many people retire early these days, but you persevere." She made perseverance sound like a disease, something to be pitied rather than admired. The subtext was clear. You're poor and old, and you have to keep working because you failed to plan better. I nodded gratefully, as if she'd given me a compliment. Tobias's jaw was so tight I thought it might crack. The conversation shifted to wedding plans. Celeste brightened immediately, launching into details about venues and flower arrangements. Patricia nodded along, making helpful suggestions that all cost thousands of dollars. When there was a pause, I offered quietly, "I'll help however I can." The table went silent, and all eyes turned to me. I clarified, voice smaller, "With the wedding. Whatever you need." Patricia's smile was so condescending, it should have come with a warning label. "Oh, Marina, that's so sweet of you to offer. But don't worry about the costs. We'll handle everything." She reached over and patted my hand like I was a child offering to help with taxes. "We want Celeste to have the wedding she deserves, the wedding she's always dreamed of. You just enjoy the day." Translation: your contribution would be embarrassing. Your money isn't real money. Stay out of it. Dominic turned his attention to Tobias, his expression somewhere between pity and disappointment. "Your mother did her best raising you alone, I'm sure. Single parenting can't be easy." He paused, letting that hang in the air like smoke. "You turned out decent." The word decent was delivered like a gift he didn't want to give. Not good, not impressive, just decent. The bare minimum of adequacy. I watched Celeste through all of this, and she said nothing. She just sipped her wine, something white and probably expensive, and avoided eye contact with everyone. She didn't defend me. She didn't defend Tobias. She just sat there, beautifully polished and morally empty, letting her parents carve us up with words while she examined her manicure. I marked that silence and catalogued it for later. Tobias finally found his voice, though it came out strained. "My mom sacrificed everything for me," he said, louder than necessary. "She worked 2 jobs to put me through school. She never missed a baseball game or a parent-teacher conference. She's the strongest person I know." His defense of me was beautiful and heartbreaking. Dominic let him finish, then smiled indulgently. "I'm sure she did sacrifice," he said, "though perhaps teaching you to aim higher might have been worth more than sacrifice. Ambition matters, son. Vision matters." The silence that followed was suffocating. Even Patricia looked uncomfortable, shifting in her seat and suddenly interested in her wineglass. Tobias's face had gone pale, then red, cycling through emotions too fast to track. My hand tightened on my water glass, the cheap plastic kind they give you when you order tap water instead of Pellegrino. I held it so tight my knuckles went white, but I kept my face soft, defeated, small. "I just wanted him to be happy," I whispered, my voice barely audible. It wasn't entirely an act. I had wanted Tobias happy. I still wanted that. But Dominic shook his head slowly, like a teacher correcting a disappointing student. "Happiness is a luxury, Marina. A nice feeling, sure. But stability is what matters, security, building something that lasts." He gestured around the expensive restaurant as if to say, "This is what matters, and you don't have it." What Dominic didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I was teaching my own lesson that night. He thought he was educating my son about class and the importance of money. He didn't know I was teaching Tobias something far more valuable, a lesson about character, about what people reveal when they think you're powerless, about the difference between wealth and worth. With every insult and every pitying glance, the Ashfords were writing their own verdict. I was just taking notes. Patricia pivoted from insults to advice, her voice taking on the tone of a lifestyle guru addressing someone beyond help. "You know, Marina, there are so many resources available now for people in your situation. Budgeting apps, coupon websites, community programs." She pulled out her phone, her diamond bracelet catching the light. "I volunteer with a financial literacy nonprofit. Perhaps I could get you enrolled?" I nodded eagerly, leaning forward as if this information was revolutionary. "I never thought of that," I said, voice full of genuine-sounding wonder. "Coupons! That's so smart!" Patricia practically glowed with satisfaction, preening under the validation of helping the less fortunate. She launched into a detailed explanation of her charitable work and how rewarding it is to give back to people who haven't had her advantages. I wanted to laugh. The foundation she described, I funded it. $50,000 a year donated anonymously through my wealth manager. She was literally spending my money while explaining poverty to me. Dominic saw an opening and took it, settling back in his chair with the satisfied expression of a man about to share profound wisdom. "You know, Marina, I grew up with nothing. Absolutely nothing." He paused for effect. "Pulled myself up by my bootstraps. Built my empire from the ground up, one building at a time. Nobody gave me anything. I kept my face neutral and attentive. What I wanted to do was pull out my phone and show him the records I'd found. The $2 million inheritance from his uncle's estate in 1994. His first building had been a gift. His bootstraps had been pre-tied. He was warming to his subject now, voice taking on the rhythm of a practiced speech. "People stay poor because they lack discipline, vision, hunger." Each word was emphasized, delivered like a punch. They make excuses instead of opportunities. They settle instead of striving. It's a mindset problem. Poverty isn't just about money, it's about how you think. I let my shoulders curl inward and made myself smaller. "I suppose you're right," I said softly. I never had much vision, just focused on getting through each day. Tobias looked like he wanted to crawl under the table and disappear. His face had gone from pale to red to almost gray. He was gripping his fork like a weapon, knuckles white, saying nothing. My poor boy, trapped between defending his mother and keeping peace with his in-laws. I could see him dying inside with each passing moment. Celeste reached over and touched his hand, finally breaking her silence. "Dad, maybe we should—" Dominic cut her off with a raised hand, not even looking at her. "I'm helping her, sweetheart. Someone needs to." He turned back to me, expression radiating superiority. "Marina, the first step is admitting where you went wrong. Not wrong exactly. Let's say where you could have done better. Made different choices. Invested in yourself instead of just surviving." The irony was thick enough to taste. I had invested in myself. I'd turned $50,000 in savings into a multi-million-dollar portfolio. But I just nodded meekly, accepting his lecture like gospel. Patricia's eyes suddenly lit up with what she clearly thought was a brilliant idea. "Oh, Marina, I'm doing a closet cleaning next week. I have so many designer pieces I've barely worn. Chanel, Prada, some Valentino. You're welcome to anything you want." She said it like she was offering me a kidney, like she was solving all my problems with her hand-me-downs. Would that help you? Fresh wardrobe, better presentation, might even boost your confidence. I accepted with forced gratitude that made my teeth hurt. That's so generous of you, Patricia. Really. I don't know what to say. What I didn't say, my investment portfolio could buy her entire wardrobe 50 times over. What I didn't say, I probably owned the same pieces, purchased new, hanging in my own closet behind the Goodwill camouflage. What I didn't say, her charity was an insult wrapped in designer labels, and I was cataloging every moment of it for later. The entrees arrived, and the contrast was almost too perfect. My sad little side salad, wilted lettuce, pale tomatoes, a lemon wedge on the side. Dominic and Patricia had steaks that cost $70 each, cooked rare and bleeding onto white china. Celeste had lobster tail with drawn butter in a silver dish. Tobias had barely touched his salmon. The table looked like a visual representation of class warfare, and I was playing the peasant perfectly. Dominic raised his wine glass, that $400 Bordeaux, and cleared his throat for a toast. Everyone lifted their glasses except me. I raised my water, the cheap plastic cup sweating condensation onto the tablecloth. To family, Dominic announced, his voice carrying to nearby tables, and to helping those less fortunate find their footing. His eyes were locked on me. The message was clear. You are the less fortunate. We are your saviors. Be grateful. The interrogation began before our water glasses were refilled. Dominic leaned back in his chair with the casual confidence of a man who'd never been told no and fixed me with what he probably thought was a friendly smile. I could have stopped it all right then. One sentence would have collapsed the entire charade. Actually, I'm a senior vice president of corporate finance earning $40,000 monthly, but I needed to see how deep their cruelty ran, how far they'd go, how much poison they'd pour into the cup before offering it to me to drink. And more than that, I needed Tobias to see it too, to really see it. Not just tonight's performance, but the truth about the people his wife came from, the values they held, the contempt they carried for anyone they deemed beneath them. So instead, I excused myself quietly. Restroom, I murmured, standing carefully. Patricia nodded absently, already turning back to her steak. What none of them noticed, my phone, left strategically on the table beside my water glass. What none of them knew, the voice recording app I'd activated before standing, the microphone facing outward, capturing everything. I walked away slowly, the defeated mother-in-law escaping to compose herself. Behind me, I knew they would finally speak freely, and I would have every word. I was gone for exactly 4 minutes. I timed it on my phone while standing in the bathroom, staring at my reflection in the gilded mirror, counting down the seconds. 4 minutes was long enough for comfort to set in, for them to believe I was truly gone, truly out of earshot. 4 minutes was long enough for people to stop performing and start revealing. When I finally played back that recording later that night, those 4 minutes would contain more truth than the entire evening combined. The recording started with the scrape of a chair, someone settling in, getting comfortable now that the poor relation had left. Then Dominic's voice, clear and cold, "Tobias, you understand this is a problem. That woman is a liability." He said that woman like I was a stain, an unfortunate accessory that came with the package. There was a pause, the clink of silverware, then he continued, "I'm not trying to be cruel. I'm being practical. You need to think about optics." Patricia's voice joined in, higher pitched and somehow more cutting. "What will people think? Your mother-in-law looking like she shops at thrift stores, showing up to events in those clothes?" The irony was so perfect it almost made me laugh. I did shop at thrift stores, but only because I enjoyed the hunt, not because I needed to. "Our friends will ask questions," Patricia continued, "about her, about your judgment, about what kind of family Celeste married into." Celeste spoke then, her voice weak and unconvincing. "She's sweet, though. Harmless." There was a pause, and I could imagine her twirling her wine glass, looking anywhere but at Tobias. I mean, she's not actually causing problems, right? She's just simple. Dominic's response was immediate and brutal. "Harmless poverty is still poverty, sweetheart. It doesn't matter if she's kind. It matters how she looks, how she reflects on us." Tobias's voice came through strained, tight with suppressed anger. "She's my mother. She raised me alone after my dad died. She worked herself to the bone for me. She's not a problem. She's not a liability." His defense of me was passionate, real, everything I'd wanted to hear. But then Dominic cut him off with the precision of a surgeon. "Then why does she look like one?" "Presentation matters, son. This reflects on Celeste, on us, on you." Patricia jumped back in, her voice taking on a magnanimous tone that made my stomach turn. "We could help, of course. We're not monsters. We could set up a small trust, get her into a better living situation. Maybe a nice assisted living facility, somewhere appropriate for someone her age." She paused, then added with devastating clarity, "But Tobias, you need to manage expectations. Your mother needs to understand her place in this family." I returned to the table just as Patricia was mid-sentence, something about venue deposits. They fell silent immediately, so abruptly it was almost comical. Fake smiles plastered themselves across their faces like masks snapping into place. Dominic's jovial host expression, Patricia's benevolent charity worker glow, Celeste's bright, brittle enthusiasm. Only Tobias looked genuine. Genuinely miserable, genuinely torn, genuinely broken. I slipped back into my seat and they resumed their performance as if nothing had happened. The waiter appeared with dessert menus, elegant leather folders embossed with gold. Patricia immediately started describing the chocolate soufflé. How divine it was, how everyone simply must try it. When the waiter turned to me, I shook my head with a small, apologetic smile. "I'm too full from my salad, but thank you." Patricia seized the moment with practiced ease, probably for the best. "Sugar at your age can be difficult to process. Metabolism slows down, you know." I caught Tobias's eye across the table, and what I saw there broke something in me. He looked shattered, guilty, trapped between defending me and keeping peace. I watched the war play out across his face, the impulse to speak up, to tell his in-laws they were cruel, to stand by me the way I'd always stood by him, and then I watched him choose silence. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. Nothing came out. He just reached for his water glass and looked away. That moment of chosen silence hurt more than every insult the Ashfords had delivered combined. My phone vibrated in my coat pocket, the coat I'd never taken off despite the restaurant's warmth. I pulled it out discreetly, glanced at the screen. A text from Luther, "Ready when you are. 20 minutes out if you need me." I read it twice, my thumb hovering over the keys. This was it, the point of no return. I could let this dinner end naturally, go home, delete the recording, pretend tonight never happened. Or I could burn it all down. I typed back a single word, "Come." Then I set the phone face down on the table and lifted my water glass, taking a long, steady drink. The trial was almost over. The verdict was about to be delivered. Dinner was winding down like a play approaching its final act, and Dominic was already performing the ritual of a man who'd never questioned a bill in his life. He lifted 2 fingers, just 2, casual as breathing, and the waiter materialized instantly, check presenter in hand. $847 for a meal where I'd eaten lettuce and drunk tap water. Dominic didn't even glance at the number before sliding his black American Express into the leather folder. Power, demonstrated through indifference to cost. I stood slowly, carefully, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "Excuse me," I said, voice soft and apologetic. "I need to make a phone call. Work emergency." The words hung in the air for a beat before Dominic's eyebrows rose in amused disbelief. Work emergency? At a bank? His tone made it clear how absurd he found the concept. "Even tellers have emergencies," I replied, meeting his eyes for just a moment before looking away, playing meek. I walked toward the restaurant's entrance, feeling their eyes on my back, probably exchanging glances about the poor woman whose emergency was likely an overdraft notification. Outside, the night air was cold and sharp, clearing my head instantly. I walked far enough from the entrance that the doorman couldn't hear, then pulled out my phone with hands that were finally, genuinely shaking. Not from fear, from the weight of what I was about to do. I dialed Luther's number and he answered on the first ring. "It's time," I said without preamble. "Bring everything, the full portfolio, The Carlisle restaurant, downtown, 20 minutes. There was a pause on the other end, the sound of papers rustling, a drawer opening. Marina? Luther said carefully, his voice carrying 15 years of professional discretion. Are you absolutely sure about this? Once this happens, there's no taking it back. I looked through the restaurant's windows at the table where my son sat with people who'd spent 2 hours dissecting my worth. I've never been more sure of anything in my life, I told him. 20 minutes. Don't be late. I returned to the table just as Dominic was signing the receipt with a flourish, adding what was probably a generous tip, because men like him enjoyed the performance of magnanimity. The check presenter sat closed on the table, transaction complete, another evening successfully purchased. I slipped back into my seat and immediately, instinctively reached for my purse. Please, I said tentatively, let me contribute something, even just— Dominic waved me off before I could finish, his gesture simultaneously gracious and dismissive. Don't insult me, Marina. Tonight's my treat. Family. Patricia leaned toward Celeste, her voice pitched to include the whole table but clearly directed at her daughter. Your father and I were thinking, perhaps a small engagement party before the wedding? Something intimate, elegant. She glanced at me briefly, then back to Celeste. Nothing Marina would need to worry about financially. We'll handle all the arrangements. She can just attend and enjoy herself. The subtext screamed, you're a guest in your own son's life, a spectator, not a participant. I let them talk for another minute, planning events I wouldn't fund, making decisions about my son's future that excluded me entirely. Then I straightened in my chair, my voice still soft but somehow carrying more weight than before. Actually, I interrupted gently, there's something I need to tell you all. About myself. About tonight. 4 pairs of eyes turned to me. Dominic's skeptical, Patricia's mildly annoyed, Celeste's confused, Tobias's alarmed. He knew something was wrong. My son always could read me better than I gave him credit for. Before I could continue, before I could find the words that would detonate everything, the restaurant's entrance doors opened. A man walked through, and he walked like someone who belonged in places like this. Expensive charcoal suit, Italian leather shoes, a briefcase that probably cost more than the Ashfords' dinner. Luther Grimes, my financial advisor for 15 years, the man who'd helped me turn inheritance and salary into empire. He scanned the restaurant with professional efficiency, found me, and headed our direction without hesitation. Dominic noticed first, his eyes tracking Luther's approach with the wariness of an alpha recognizing potential competition. "Who's that?" he asked, though the question was more territorial than curious. I didn't answer. I just watched Luther navigate between tables, briefcase gripping professionally, his expression neutral and perfectly businesslike. Patricia followed Dominic's gaze, and her forehead creased slightly. Luther's suit was better than Dominic's, his briefcase more expensive than her purse. The cost alone demanded explanation. Luther reached our table and addressed me with perfect formality. "Ms. Bennett, my apologies for the interruption." His voice carried authority, the kind that came from decades of managing significant wealth. He didn't acknowledge the others, didn't introduce himself, just stood there radiating competence and expense. Dominic's confusion was shifting to irritation. Celeste looked between Luther and me like we were speaking a language she didn't understand. Tobias had gone pale, his knuckles white around his fork. I looked at Luther, then at the briefcase, then at the faces around the table. This was it, the moment where everything I'd built, the lie, the lesson, the performance, would either collapse or crystallize into truth. "Thank you for coming," I said, and my voice had changed. No more meekness, no more trembling, just clarity, just steel wrapped in silk. I turned to Dominic and Patricia and Celeste and finally to Tobias. "I told you I needed to tell you something. Luther's here to help me do that. You see, there's been a misunderstanding tonight about who I am, about what I do, about everything you think you know about me." Luther stood at our table with the calm authority of someone who'd spent decades managing significant wealth, and when he spoke again, his voice carried across the immediate space. "Ms. Bennett, I have the documents you requested." He set the leather briefcase on the table between the wine glasses and dessert plates, and the sound it made, that solid, expensive thunk, seemed to echo in the sudden silence. Dominic finally found his voice. "Who is this?" I looked at Dominic directly, no longer playing meek, no longer hiding behind trembling uncertainty. "This is Luther Grimes, my financial advisor." The words landed like stones in still water, ripples of confusion spreading across every face at the table. Financial advisor. Not accountant for someone with a modest savings account. Not tax preparer for someone filing simple returns. Financial advisor, the kind of professional you only needed when you had serious wealth to manage. The silence that followed was profound, almost sacred in its completeness. Everyone was processing those two words, trying to reconcile them with the woman who'd ordered a side salad and water. Tobias looked physically ill, his face cycling through expressions too fast to track. Confusion, realization, betrayal, shock. Patricia's mouth had literally fallen open, her expensive lipstick suddenly garish against her slackened jaw. Celeste just stared, frozen with her wine glass halfway to her lips. Dominic's eyes narrowed, calculating, already trying to understand what game was being played and how he'd lost control of it. "I think there's been a misunderstanding tonight," I continued, my voice steady now, no tremor, no weakness. "About who I am, about what I do, about my life." I stood slowly, deliberately, and began unbuttoning my mother's old wool coat, the one I'd worn like armor all evening, the one that had signaled poverty and struggle. I shrugged it off and let it fall to my chair like shed skin. Beneath it was a blouse I'd chosen carefully. Simple, well-cut, elegant in its understatement. Nothing flashy, nothing designer-labeled, but everything about it whispered quality to anyone who knew how to look. The fabric, the tailoring, the way it draped, it was the kind of blouse you bought when you understood that real wealth didn't need to announce itself. Suddenly, in context, it read completely differently. Not thrift store, not desperate, understated wealth. Luther opened the briefcase with practiced efficiency, and I watched the Ashfords' eyes track the movement like they were watching a magic trick. Inside, documents organized in clear folders, everything labeled and indexed, bank statements showing balances that made Dominic's net worth look modest, investment portfolios diversified across markets and industries, property deeds stamped and notarized, the paper trail of a life they'd never imagined. "I'm not a bank teller," I said, each word deliberate and clear. "I'm a senior vice president of corporate finance at Whitmore & Associates. I've held that position for 12 years. Before that, I was a portfolio manager at Sterling Capital." I paused, let that sink in, watched their faces contort as they tried to recalculate everything they'd assumed. "I earn $40,000 per month. That's my base salary before bonuses and stock options." Dominic's face drained of color so completely he looked like he might faint. The transformation was almost comical. From ruddy confidence to ashen shock in the space of seconds. Patricia made a sound, something between a gasp and a choke, her mouth opening and closing like a fish drowning in air. Her hand reached for her wineglass, missed, knocked it slightly so red liquid sloshed against white tablecloth. No one moved to write it. I pulled a document from the briefcase, one Luther had prepared months ago during routine portfolio review. "This represents just my liquid assets," I said, running my finger down the summary page. $2.3 million in stocks, bonds, and cash instruments. I also own 3 properties outright, 2 rental units in the city and a commercial building downtown. I looked directly at Dominic and I let myself smile. "Just a little. That last property, the one on 5th and Madison, your company tried to acquire it last year. I turned down your offer. It was insulting." Tobias finally spoke, and his voice was barely a whisper, strangled and small. "Mom? What?" He was staring at me like I was a stranger, like the woman who'd raised him had been replaced by someone else entirely, like 30 years of his life had just been revealed as elaborate fiction. I turned to him, and my expression softened despite everything, because he was still my son, still my boy, still the person I loved most in the world, even if I'd just shattered his understanding of me. "I'm sorry, sweetheart," I said, and I meant it with every fiber of my being. I'm so sorry, but I needed them to show me who they were. I gestured to the Ashfords, who were still frozen in various states of shock and horror. I needed to see how they'd treat someone they thought was beneath them, how they'd treat you for having a mother they deemed unworthy. And I needed you to see it too. Luther had remained silent through all of this, professional to his core, but now he added one more detail with quiet precision. "If I may," he said, looking at Dominic. "The property Ms. Bennett mentioned, she purchased it in 2018 for $1.2 million cash. It's currently valued at $3.7 million. She's received multiple offers since, all declined. She prefers long-term holds in her real estate portfolio." The implication was clear. Marina didn't just have money. She had the kind of money that made money while she slept. The restaurant had gone quiet around us. Other diners were watching now, pretending not to stare but clearly fascinated by the drama unfolding at our table. A waiter hovered nearby, uncertain whether to intervene or retreat. The sommelier had actually stopped mid-pour at another table, frozen with bottle tilted. We'd become the evening's entertainment, and I wasn't finished yet. I pulled my phone from my coat pocket, the coat still draped over my chair like evidence of a crime, and held it up so everyone could see. "There's one more thing," I said quietly. "While I was in the restroom, I left my phone here, recording." I tapped the screen and the playback began, voices emerging tinny but perfectly clear from the small speaker. Dominic's voice first. "Tobias, you understand this is a problem. That woman is a liability." The effect was instantaneous and devastating. Dominic lurched forward as if to grab the phone, but Luther stepped smoothly between us, his presence a wall. Patricia made a small wounded sound. The recording continued, merciless and clear, Patricia's voice declaring, "What will people think?" Celeste's weak defense that I was harmless. Dominic's brutal assessment that harmless poverty is still poverty. Every cruel word they'd spoken in my absence, now played back for the entire restaurant to hear. Nearby diners had stopped even pretending not to watch. I saw a woman at the next table lean toward her companion, whispering urgently. A man 2 tables over had his phone out, probably texting someone about the scene unfolding. The sommelier had abandoned all pretense of working and was just standing there, mouth slightly open. The Ashfords were being publicly exposed, their cruelty broadcast to strangers who would remember this night, who would talk about it, who would recognize their faces and names and associate them forever with this humiliation. Dominic tried to recover, his business instincts kicking in even through shock. "Marina, this is... You misunderstood the context. We were just concerned." I held up one hand and he fell silent immediately, like a dog trained to obey. "I understood perfectly," I said, my voice cutting through his excuses like a blade. "I understood that you judged me based on my clothing, that you thought kindness towards someone you believed poor was charity rather than basic human decency. I understood everything." Patricia switched tactics with the desperation of someone watching their social standing crumble in real time. "You deceived us," she said, voice shrill and accusatory. "You lied! You came here in disguise! You performed this whole charade!" I cut her off calmly. I dressed simply and said nothing. "Every assumption you made was your own. Every insult you delivered was your choice. You filled in the blanks with your own prejudice." Celeste was crying now, tears running mascara down her carefully made-up face, but I couldn't tell if it was embarrassment or genuine emotion. Was she crying because she was horrified by her parents' behavior, or because she was caught being complicit in it? Her hands covered her face and her shoulders shook, and Tobias reached for her automatically, comfort offered by habit rather than thought. Even now, even in this moment, he was torn between his wife and his mother. Tobias stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Mom, can we talk? Outside? Please?" His voice was strained, caught between anger and confusion and something that might have been grief. I looked at him and softened slightly, but I didn't move. "We can," I said gently. "We will. But first I need to finish this. I need to say what needs to be said." I turned my full attention to Dominic, who was still trying to compose himself, to find the upper hand he'd held so confidently just minutes ago. "You talked about bootstrapping tonight," I said, voice steady and cold. "Vision, discipline, hunger. You lectured me about poverty being a mindset, about people making excuses instead of opportunities." I paused, let him remember his own words. "I had all three qualities you claim to value. I just didn't feel the need to announce it. Didn't need to broadcast it, didn't need to use it as a weapon to make others feel small." I continued, building momentum, the words I'd held back all evening finally finding their release. "You judge people by their clothes, their perceived status, their surface presentation. You offered me charity while wearing a watch worth more than my mother made in her entire life working factory shifts." I gestured to his wrist, where the Patek Philippe gleamed expensively. "That's an $80,000 watch, by the way. I know because I considered buying the same model last year. Decided it was ostentatious." Luther spoke again, his voice quiet but carrying absolute authority. "If I may add," he said, looking directly at Dominic, "Ms. Bennett's charitable donations last year exceeded your company's annual net profit, Mr. Ashford. She gives anonymously to 17 different organizations, including," he paused meaningfully, "the Financial Literacy Foundation Mrs. Ashford volunteers with. You've been spending her money while insulting her to her face." The silence that followed was absolute. Patricia's face had gone from red to white to an alarming shade of purple. Dominic looked like he'd been punched. Celeste's crying had stopped, replaced by frozen horror, and Tobias just stared at me like I was a puzzle he'd been solving his whole life, only to discover he'd been looking at it upside down. I stood, smoothing down my blouse, gathering my dignity around me like the coat I'd finally shed. "I've seen enough," I said simply. "Tobias, we're leaving." I turned to Celeste, still frozen in her chair, and my voice softened just slightly. "Celeste, you have a choice to make. You can stay with parents who judge people by their bank accounts, or you can leave with a husband who learned to value character. Choose carefully." I picked up my purse. A simple leather bag I'd carried for years, actually Prada but so understated nobody would know, and walked toward the exit. Luther fell into step beside me, briefcase secured. Behind us I heard Tobias's chair scrape again. Heard his footsteps following. Heard Celeste's voice, small and broken. "Tobias, wait!" But I didn't turn around. Didn't look back. The coat stayed draped over the chair, abandoned. I didn't need disguises anymore. The truth was my armor now. Outside, the night air hit like a slap, cold and sharp and clarifying. Tobias was already on the sidewalk, pacing back and forth like a caged animal, his hands shaking as he ran them through his hair over and over. When he saw me emerge from the restaurant, he stopped and turned, and the look on his face was something I'd never seen before. Not anger, not confusion, something worse, betrayal so profound it had become its own kind of grief. "How could you do that to me?" he said, and his voice cracked on the last word. "I didn't do it to you," I said, keeping my voice steady even as my heart fractured. "I did it for you. To protect you from—" He laughed, but it was a terrible sound, broken and sharp. "Protect me? You humiliated me. You lied to me my entire life. You let me believe you were struggling, that you needed help, that I wasn't doing enough." His voice rose with each accusation, and I watched my son come apart in front of me, watched 30 years of carefully constructed reality shatter like glass. The truth spilled out of me then, desperate and raw. I told him about the choice I'd made at his father's funeral, the promise I'd whispered over his sleeping body that he would never be spoiled, never take money for granted, never become the kind of person who measured worth in dollars. I told him about watching wealthy children at his school, how entitled they were, how careless with kindness. I told him I'd raised him in deliberate poverty's shadow so he'd learn to see people, really see them, not their bank accounts or their clothes or their social status. "I defended you!" Tobias shouted, and tears were streaming down his face now, unchecked and furious. "I sat at that table and defended you while they tore you apart. I felt guilty every single day that I couldn't help you more, couldn't give you a better life, couldn't pay you back for everything you sacrificed." His hands were fists at his sides, trembling. "You let me feel like a failure, Mom. You watched me tie myself in knots trying to protect you from judgment, and the whole time it was a lie. The whole time you were laughing at me." "I was never laughing," I said, and my own tears finally came, hot and heavy and 3 decades overdue. "I never wanted you to feel that way. I never wanted you to feel like a failure. I wanted you to value people for who they are, not what they have. I wanted you to have empathy, to understand struggle, to never look at someone the way the Ashfords looked at me tonight." My voice broke completely. "I wanted to raise a good man, Tobias. And I did. You are good. You are kind. You defended your mother even when you thought she was poor and embarrassing. That's who you are because of the choices I made." "Instead," Tobias said, his voice going quiet, and somehow more devastating for it, "you taught me that the people I love lie to me, that nothing is what it seems, that I can't trust my own perception of reality." He took a step back, then another, putting physical distance between us like he couldn't bear to be close to me anymore. "I don't know who you are. I don't know if I ever did." And then he turned and walked away, not running, just walking with his shoulders hunched and his hands in his pockets, moving away from me like I was something toxic he needed to escape. The restaurant door opened, and Celeste emerged, her face blotchy from crying, her perfect makeup destroyed. She stood there for a moment, looking between Tobias's retreating form and me, and I saw her make a choice in real time. She could stay with her parents, could go back inside and tend to their wounded pride and demolished egos, or she could follow my son into whatever uncertain future waited. She walked to Tobias, her heels clicking on the pavement, and when she reached him she took his hand. He didn't pull away. She turned back to look at me, and her expression was complicated. Shame and anger and something that might have been respect all tangled together. "I'm sorry for tonight," she said, her voice carrying across the distance between us. "For my parents, for the things they said. They were cruel and I should have stopped them." She paused, squeezed Tobias's hand tighter. "But I'm also angry at you, Marina, what you did tonight. Tobias doesn't deserve to be collateral damage in your test. He doesn't deserve to be a prop in your revenge." They left together then, walking down the sidewalk toward the parking garage, and I watched them go until they disappeared around a corner. I stood alone on the empty sidewalk, wealthy and powerful and utterly isolated. The city lights glittered around me, millions of dollars worth of real estate in my portfolio, accounts that could buy almost anything I wanted. But I couldn't buy back the last 5 minutes. Couldn't purchase my son's forgiveness with any amount of money. The cost of truth, visualized one woman standing by herself outside an expensive restaurant, wondering if she'd won or lost. Luther approached quietly, his footsteps barely audible. "Ms. Bennett," he said gently, "your car is here." I nodded but didn't move. Couldn't quite make my feet work yet. After a moment I asked the question that was eating me alive. "Did I do the right thing, Luther? Tell me honestly. Was I protecting him, or just proving something to myself?" Luther was silent for a long moment, and I appreciated that he didn't rush to comfort me with easy lies. "I don't know," he said finally. "I don't know if anyone can answer that except Tobias, and maybe not for a long time." He paused, then added, "But you did the honest thing. You showed him the truth about the family he married into. You showed him what people look like when they think no one's watching. Whether that was right or wrong, I think you'll both be figuring that out for a while." He gestured toward the town car waiting at the curb. "Come on, let's get you home." As we come to the end of this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Thanks for watching.